Let's answer the question that is dominating the world right now. Why would a man who hates war and loves negotiations, that's what he's done his whole career, why would he consider military action against Iran? This is a dilemma for Donald Trump, right? Biggest decision perhaps of his presidency that he's faced. And it's an interesting challenge because right now you've got a divide within the country. On the far left, people like David Hogg, who's been vice chairman of the DNC, saying absolutely no involvement in a conflict like this. And then you've got people in Donald Trump's own party, part of the MAGA movement, like Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, saying absolutely not, sounding a lot like David Hogg. And yet Donald Trump and his advisors recognize that this is a different kind of moment. For so many other people in the party, including people in the MAGA movement, there is a sense of an opportunity that has not existed for Donald Trump in his presidency, including his first term, and for his four predecessors, all of whom, and for Joe Biden, all of whom recognize that Iran is not just a bad actor. Iran is a special case, not just because it's sponsored terrorism around the region and around the world, not just because it has ballistic missiles, but nuclear capability, poised to have a nuclear weapon. And Donald Trump has been quite clear, as were his predecessors, Iran cannot be allowed to get a nuclear weapon. What are the two ways people have talked about stopping it? One is a negotiation, and the other is military action. And so what I want to try to do is tell you where I think Donald Trump's head has gotten, that's gotten him to this point. Why is someone who does not like war, has been outspoken and critical of President Bush, for instance, in Iraq, in saying these are not the kind of things the United States should be doing. How did his head get to this place? First of all, Donald Trump shares with Benjamin Netanyahu that the clock has run out, that Iran is too close to developing a nuclear weapon. That's intelligence that some dispute. But the international agencies that monitor Iraq's capability, Israeli intelligence, they are quite clear that Iran is a danger for the world as it's on the doorstep of marrying up two technologies: ballistic missiles, including intercontinental ballistic missiles that could reach the United States and certainly reach Israel, and nuclear capability. And the other thing that has come a cropper, that has come to a head, is the Israeli intelligence, Israeli military. They've been studying the question of how to use intelligence and military capability for decades to take out Iran's nuclear program and missile program, how to execute that. And part of what Donald Trump, I believe, has caused him to be in this position, to reach this conclusion, is an awareness of what Israel has. Donald Trump has enormous respect for the Israeli intelligence community, for their military capability. This is something about Donald Trump. He's in awe of anything that's best in the world. He loves great singers. He loves great athletes. Anything that's great, where he can say that's as good as it exists on the planet, he loves. And he's fascinated by people who can achieve that kind of excellence. He generously praises them. And you've heard him talk about in the last few days the Israeli intelligence capability, the Israeli military capability. That gives him confidence, looking at Israel's history of accomplishment on offense and defense. It gives him confidence that he can partner with Israel and work with them to eliminate something that he has said repeatedly must be eliminated: Iran's capacity to produce a nuclear weapon. In the context of the historical success of Israel going against its enemies in the region, its adversaries in the region, Donald Trump, one factor for him is Israel knows how to do this. He's delighted to partner with what I would argue is maybe the best side, or the best force rather, for marrying intelligence capability with a military goal. I don't think anyone literally in the history of the planet has done it better than the Israelis, and Donald Trump knows that. Second factor, I think, is Iran and this place they're in. They are weaker than they've ever been since they started to pose this threat to the world. Their proxies in the region have been either eliminated or seriously diminished by Israel and by others. Israel last year in their conflict with Iran started to degrade Iran's air abilities. And in this conflict, they've eliminated Iran's ability to control the skies over their own country. That's a big advantage. As you think about a U.S. military involvement, it's going to be from the air. And what the United States doesn't want to go into is to face an Iran that has the capability to fight with or shoot down American aircraft, Israel's eliminated that. That makes this much more likely. And as I said, Iran's not just a bad actor. Iran, maybe after Putin, is the worst actor on the planet, maybe more so than North Korea. If you look at their threat to Israel, if you look at how destabilizing they are in the Middle East, the threat they pose to energy prices, their capacity to threaten American interests directly. You look at all that and you say, this is an opportunity, I believe, that the president sees to eliminate what they are able to do. Then you think about the context in which all this has played out over the last several days as the president considers military action. One is the reaction from around the world. There has been condemnation of Israel by the Saudis, the Gulf states. Some in Europe have urged the restraint on the part of the Israelis. And there are some domestic voices, even beyond isolationist MAGA, including the Democratic Party, that have said, they don't love this. But you think about what the reaction might have been, would have been only a few years ago, how the world would have reacted to an Israeli strike like this. Now, Israel says it's a matter of defense. It's its existential need. But it was a preemptive attack. And some would say it was an overkill. And yet the reaction has been pretty muted. And there are people around the president who say they've noticed that muted reaction. They recognize that there's an openness to this. The market's the same thing. Some markets are down, and obviously people are concerned about energy prices. But you've not seen a collapse in markets. And again, if you had said in a political science course or as a war game a few years ago, what would happen to energy prices in the markets if Israel attacked Iran, you'd be predicting a worldwide recession. Panic really hasn't happened, and that I think is a factor. Then I'll say again, Israel, to make this successful, they must eliminate Iran's nuclear capability. Leave regime change aside for a moment. The whole point of this mission is to set back the Iranian nuclear program to zero. Not degrade it as they've done in the past with previous operations, but to set it back to zero. And in order to do that, they have to take out the capability at a place called Fordo. It's one of the main Iran nuclear sites, and it's in a mountain. It's buried deep underground, purposely, because the Israelis don't have the capability to take it out. There's one country in the world with the military capability to take out Fordo, and that's the United States, using B-52s with these bunker-busting bombs that can burrow deep down and take it out. Now, could Israel take out Fordo some other way? They've said in the last few days that they can take it out, or that it will be taken out. You could get people in there and access the facility and explode it that way. But the reason the United States is poised for this, the reason the United States has had to consider this, is because if you want to take out Fordo, if you want to restrain Iran's nuclear capability and take it down to zero, the only way is to have the United States involved. And Donald Trump knows that, just as previous presidents have. Endless conversations between Israeli prime ministers and particularly Netanyahu and American presidents about would the United States allow its B-52s to be used in this way. And again, it's the moment when American president has finally considered it in a serious way. We've seen U.S. assets move to the region, military assets move to the region. Now, that could be just as a show of support for Israel. It could also be to be ready in case Iran strikes. President Trump has said, if the United States, and Secretary Rubio said it as well, if the United States is hit by Iran in some way, and Iran could do that, then the United States would retaliate. So those forces could be there in anticipation of a possible need to retaliate. But it could also be, according to my sources, part of this operation. The B-52s would need to be refueled. They'd need to be serviced. They'd need to be protected. It's also the case that, although Donald Trump says mixed things about Russia, to say the least, that Russia would be suffering a loss because Iran has been a staunch ally of Russia and a common cause within the Middle East. And if you're looking to push back on Russia, as many in the Trump administration are, an Iranian loss would have the added benefit, eliminating their nuclear capacity, of changing things in the balance of power and adversely to Russia. I look also at people in the administration. I look at people on Capitol Hill who get briefed by the administration, their allies, for instance, on the Intelligence Committee in the Senate. The body language also suggests that there's quiet support for this, not universally, but there is quiet support for this. Then we get to regime change. That's more complicated. There's no doubt that if you said to most policymakers in the United States, the previous Democratic presidents, do you want there to be a plan to eliminate Iran's nuclear and missile capability? Yeah, there's pretty big consensus around that. Maybe not how it would be done, but that it should be done. But should the United States and Israel do anything to foster regime change in Iran? All the negatives, all the dangers associated with that, they're pretty intense, right? What would happen if the current government fell? No tears would be shed for the current leaders, and many of them have already been killed by the Israelis, and probably more will be as well. But what happens if they're gone? What steps into place? Now, Iran has a big middle class, upper middle class, a lot of educated people. The assumption is if they were given an opportunity to change their form of government, more secular, more representative, less repressive, that they would choose that. But we don't really know that for sure. And so whenever you're talking about a military action that could, and the Israelis have been quite open about this, that could lead to a regime change in Iran, you have to be worried. And President Trump is worried about it, as are his advisors. What would happen? Would there be bloodshed? Would there be counter-revolution? Would there be factions? Who would control the military? Would there be elections? What role would Israel and the United States play? Who in Iran might step forward to be a leader to try to transition from this long-running repressive regime that sponsored terrorism to something else? This is a really tough choice. But you've seen lots of prominent voices in the United States, a lot of calmness, even ones who aren't always favorable to Donald Trump, say maybe it's time for regime change. It's been the wish of many American presidents that that would happen organically, that there'd be a revolution not inspired by an Israeli attack or an American attack, but rather happen organically, as has happened in some countries in the region. It doesn't seem like it. It seems like the theocracy in Iran, the dictatorship in Iran, has enough control over society that hasn't happened. In fact, even as the attacks from Israel have come, there have been very few signs within Iran that the people would like to rise up to take advantage of the opportunity. But it's another factor that Donald Trump has to consider. And you consider it on both sides. There are people in the administration who say, yeah, the Israelis want regime change. That would be good. Let them take the lead on it. But if our actions in working in concert with Israel lead to regime change in Iran, great. Then there are people in the administration who have the attitude of, we've seen this movie before. We don't want to be part of that. Donald Trump, as military action gets pondered, has to think about that. What's he going to do if the government falls there? The Iranians are trying to convince the Trump administration they're ready to negotiate. And the body language for the president as he left Canada back from the G7, to me, to my ear, the body language there was a tell that he's done negotiating. If the Iranians want to surrender, if the Iranians want to say we're willing to get rid of our nuclear program, we'll acknowledge that we had one. We're ending it out. We're giving up our nuclear capacity. We're giving up our missiles. I think that president would take a victory lap on that. But there's no indication that that's the posture of the Iranians. Everything the Iranians are saying to their allies in the Middle East, the countries who they'll deal with as intermediaries, is, yeah, let's have a ceasefire and talk. We're willing to talk. Donald Trump likes to negotiate, but he doesn't like to waste time, and he doesn't like to negotiate people who he doesn't think are negotiating in good faith. Many people in the White House, many people in the administration say it's too late to negotiate with them, and they're not negotiating in good faith. That's not a total view, and the president's got a nuanced view on this. He'll take a negotiation, but it's got to be in good faith.